There's an older slider, red-eared slider, and that turned out to be the most numerous type of turtle in Radnor Lake. This is a very old male. He's got long claws, but his claws are kind of worn down, and that's how you tell the males from the females. The males are usually a little smaller. They have long claws, and I thought it's probably for fighting or something. Turns out, no, it's for their courtship. They they go in up to the female facing her, and they take their little claws and scratch her on the nose, and somehow that tells her it's time to mate. So that's the only reason for those claws. Turtles are strange. And of course, the red-eared slider, when they're really small, they're beautiful. You can see where the red ear comes from right there. Sometimes it's called the elegant slider. It's another name for it. If you look at the top of the shell on this one, you see right in this area, you see an algae growing there. There's a professor at Vanderbilt that asked me to look out for that, and if I saw any of it, to collect some for him, because that algae grows nowhere else, just on turtle shells. It's a pretty specific lifestyle. And you can get a pretty good guesstimate of ages too, especially with the sliders. Now this one is a young one, and these spots on the bottom are very distinguishable. But as the turtle gets older, now here's a older one, you see what's happening to those spots, they start running, they get wider. And then we get to an older turtle, and then finally a very old turtle, and the spots are gone. That's just the melanistic pigment that spreads out there. You can also, you can't see it in this picture, but there's these little annuli, little like growth rings on a tree. And you can count them, and you can almost tell the exact age of the turtle on the sliders. Now, you couldn't do that on the snappers. And then sometimes I would just weigh the smaller turtles this way. I would put the hook of the spring scale through the tag, and that actually tested the strength of the tag, be sure it wouldn't pull out when we did that. With the snappers later on, I had to have a little lasso on the bottom of the scale that's put around their tail. It's kind of hard to hold out a 50-pound snapper like this. And when you do, you got to make sure he's pointed the other way. And just to make sure, I used another way of identifying them, of notching. Now, these outer, they're called the marginal scutes, the outer scutes, and they're numbered. This is number 1, no, that's 2, this is 3 over here, so that's number 23. And you can get about 900 combinations of numbers that way. So that worked pretty well. Just in case that tagging process didn't work the way I wanted it to, at least I had another way of identifying these turtles. Snappers were a whole different ballgame. You get snapper in hand, and you see the first thing that happens, he starts scratching you, and I had scars all over my arms from those claws. I never once let one get a hold of me, not bite me, you know. Always made sure that I was in the right place at the right time. And then the first thing I did is check them for parasites, because there's a type of leech that only parasitizes snapping turtles, and many of them had parasites. Here's one, a leech on a rock. It's hard to see. And when I was standing in the water, especially in the summertime with a pair of shorts on and get out and get back in the boat, my legs were covered with them. But they weren't digging in, they were just going for a ride. I could just take my finger and just flip them off. Because they're very, very specific. They only have one kind of host that they parasitize. That's one taken, put on a slide. It's a very small leech. It's not really, even on the turtles, it's not really a threat to their health. There's a typical response when you take a snapping turtle out of the water. I found too, very early, if you want to quiet them down, you just lay them on the seat, on their back, and they stop moving, stop snapping. Unless you try to drill the hole like I'm doing there, and then when that vibration hits them, they become animated. And what happens, they kick. And the first time we tried this, they kicked the drill and just broke that scoot. And so I had to have a different approach to that. So we put them on their belly. We'd slide, there's the edge of the seat, we'd slide them up under the seat, the head, the rear end sticking out, and I would drill the hole and put the tag in there very quickly. The whole time they would be striking and hitting the bottom of the seat, and it would make a sound like boom, boom, like a gunshot on that metal boat. And people on the other side of the lake were looking at me through binoculars, wondering, what is he doing over there? Well, I got some ducks over here. And there's one with a tag in it there. Sexing snapping turtles is a lot more difficult than it was with the sliders, especially the big ones. Now, that one's an old picture. Caught that with a friend of mine from Belmont when I was a student there. We went out to Radnor one day and just walked the road and caught him in the Big South Pond on the other side of the lake there. He was a Tennessee record at that time. He's 63 pounds. And we took him, the warden came by and he said, what are you boys doing? Well, I saw this turtle. Would you mind if we take him to Belmont and weigh him? Because he looks like a record. You can take all those you want. And he learned we were hunting snakes too. And he said, yeah, take all the snakes you want. And so we took him out to Belmont. I was washing him off and he lunged out and snapped the hose in half, which surprised me because their bite is greatly exaggerated. They cannot bite broom handles in half. Now, if they got hold of your little finger, one that size could probably do a lot of damage. And they do hold on forever. They won't let go. You have to kill the turtle and make him let go if he gets a hold of it. That made me more determined they were not going to get a hold of him. The biggest one I caught was this one. He was 54 pounds. And getting him out of the trap was a chore, to say the least, especially when there were others in there with him. And it was a lot of fun, though. I like a challenge. You know, there are opportunities. You see them eating a fish, dead or alive. You see them, this one took on a black rat snake, and the snake was still alive, which really surprised me. He was on a bank, and I saw the movement, heard the movement in the bushes, and I looked over there and said, my word. I was just not expecting to see that. We also found mud turtles, and they presented a special problem, tagging. Turned them over and put a little tiny tag on the back part of their plastron, and that worked pretty well. Didn't find many of these. And one that I expected to find, a close cousin of the mud turtle, is the stink pot. You see here. Didn't find any until many years later when I was taking my students out there, and we found one of these that was a world record. It was the oldest and the biggest stink pot ever found. Lynn Ann Welch, that worked there, took the turtle over to MTSU and had that verified. And she insisted that we bring him back out there and let him go. She said, any turtle that can live that long needs to be allowed to live his life out in his habitat. And then the little box turtles, they'd come down to the water. I didn't tag these, I just observed. And one thing I observed about these guys, they have a really tough time mating because of that big shell. Now, this is the male. Tell by the red eye. It's either red or yellow. And underneath, there's an indention to help him mount the female, but it doesn't work very well because it's her shell is so thick. I observed these two right here in the woods one day. I sat there for 2 hours where they tried to mate and they never did. They couldn't do it. And it's a dangerous thing for the male because he can fall off, and you can find the remnants of these males all over the woods where they fall off and they can't get back up and they lay there and die. So when you find these shells in the woods, there's a whole jar of them right there on the table. That's usually what happens. Not always, but that's usually what happens. But the female does have an adaptation that helps the turtles survive, the species, helps them survive. She can, after one mating, she can keep the sperm cells in her cloaca alive for 2 years and lay like 6 to 7 clutches of eggs from one single mating. And so that's allowed them to survive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to survive. This was the biggest surprise of all, the softshell turtles. This is the spiny softshell. If you look at it from the top, you see the little row of spines there, and that's where it gets its name. They're not particularly beautiful. You have a little snorkel nose, and they have that so they can take that long neck and go up and get a breath of air in a stream, bring it back down. The ones we found at first were huge. I had no idea they lived to be that big. These were big females. We're talking about a shell at least that long. And they caught one in the trap, and I had a undergraduate helping me. And I said, now hear that these things can run very fast, fast as a man for a short period of time, for a short distance. I want you to get between me and the lake just in case she gets away from me. So he's like a football player in a cramps position. And everything went well. I didn't have to drill a hole. I just snapped the tag into it. It's like leather. And so I pulled her up and tried to get that lasso around the back leg. I knew it would stay on the tail. And she slipped out of it, hit the ground, and in 1.2 seconds, I don't know if that's right, but about that amount of time, she was in the water. And the kid was standing there, and she went right between his legs, and we were standing there going, what just happened? I said, we just got outfoxed by a turtle, a very fast turtle. And when one day I drove up on the dam, there's one standing in the parking lot, and they take this posture. I've seen this at the Okefenokee Swamp a few times too. When they're caught out in the open, they straighten out their front legs and stick their head straight up in the air, trying to look like a plant, I guess. I don't know what they're doing. And they just freeze. And so I got out of the car and I snuck down the bank and was going to get between her and the water. Finally, she panicked, started for the water, and I literally had to make a flying tackle on her and got her and tagged her and weighed her and let her go. So there are several of them that I caught by hand like that, especially mating snappers, because I would drift up into the shallows without the motor on, and if they were mating, they were oblivious to everything around them. And so I would just reach down and grab them. I felt kind of bad about that, but I put them right back where they were after it was over. And I caught 3 pairs that way, and most of those were, about this big. They were adults, but they were young adults. And so any way I could catch them, you hear those stories and you think, oh, they can't be true. A turtle can't run faster than a man. Until you encounter one of these, and then they didn't exaggerate. they weren't even accurate with their description of it. This is one of my students caught in the trap years later. As soon as I started teaching at BGA, I still went out, even though I'd written the thesis, I still went out there with my students. And this is the turtle that I kept looking for. This is Alligator Snapper. This is one we had at the museum. That's really dark for some reason. This one weighed 100 pounds and was found in a commercial fishing net at Old Hickory Lake. And I kept thinking, surely there must be 1 or 2 of these in Radnor. One day when I came in, there was a state patrolman waiting on me. He said, "You the turtle man?" I said, "I guess I am. I'm the only one out here who fit that description." He said, "Well, I want to tell you, I found the turtle out here that's as big as the trunk of my car." And it started toward the water, and I shot him 3 times and left a trail of blood. I went, "You shot him?" And I explained to him, I said, "This is a sanctuary. You don't ever shoot anything in here." He said, "I thought it might be dangerous to people." I said, "No, sir, it's not. They're not dangerous to anybody. They just lay on the bottom." Let me go to the next one. I think it's a little lighter. That mouth agape, and of course that little part of their tongue looks like a worm, and that's how they get their food. And sometimes they won't move for a week. They sit there, they breathe through their skin. That allows them to stay under for a long, long time. And so they won't go into a trap because they're not hunting for food. The food comes to them. And so I actually went out there in warm days and snorkeled in the shallows looking for these guys, but they're hard to spot. They look like a rotting log when they're lying on the bottom. They're covered with a lot of silt. I wouldn't want to step on one to find out. Because this one had a head the size of a football. Television stations came out. The newspapers ran articles about the turtle study going on. And I'm glad they did, because later on I would get calls from people saying, "I found one of your turtles in my backyard." "Oh yeah, where are you?" "I'm out here in Bellevue." And so I learned very quickly that female turtles will travel great distances looking for nesting sites. And of course they had a lot of nesting sites around Radnor, and I watched them dig and lay their eggs a few times, and most of those were preyed upon by skunks and raccoons. But I got a chance to talk to people. I'd tease around with them at first. I'd come in, they said, "What are you doing out there?" "Well, fish aren't biting and I ran out of beer." And they just looked horrified, and I said, "No, I'm just kidding." And I'd tell them what I was up to and show them the inside of the cooler. "My tool's in here, And so I got a chance to do a little education there too. And that's one of the things, the study was, I thought, pretty important, but there were a lot of fringe benefits as well. Like, for example, these women kept jumping in the boat with me every time I wanted to go out. No, that's my wife, Miranda. She went out a few times. And, you know, she's pretty cool head. I'd dump those snappers in the boat. She just sat there and, doesn't that hurt them? I don't think so, but she enjoyed just going out on the lake because you had to have permission to go out on the lake in a boat then. And so they were, a lot of people jumped at the chance to go out there with me. If we can have the next tray, I'll show you some other things that what I call fringe benefits of this study. You know, I took my students from BGA out there many times, and not just to do a turtle study, but we had, every summer, I had an aquatic biology course, lasted a week at BGA, and we went to Radnor, of course, every time we had this course. And we also, the second week, we finished with marine biology down in Crystal River, Florida. And so they got half a credit for each week, put two together, got a whole credit. Some of them didn't go to Crystal River because it was pretty expensive. And we had to go down there and pay for the use of the facilities, but they had a great facility down there. It's called Marine Science Station, and it's there for high school and college students to come there and study marine biology. That's one. This kid right there, his name is Jeff Davis. He's very big in the Harper River Association now in Franklin. So I guess you got to start there, holding a big old snapping turtle, we caught that day. The guy right there, Chip Throckmorton, is the mayor of Oak Hill now. I'll show you another picture of him later. He's changed a lot. But we would have groups, and we would divide them up, and one group would be out in the boat, take bottom samples, and we would look for what we call thermocline, where your hot water and your cold water meet. And so you had a sample bottle, and you drop it over the side of the boat, and you had thermometers in there, and you'd take the readings as you pulled it up. And then we had another group working around the edges, looking for aquatic life of different kinds. And then another group would be doing chemical tests on the bank. And then they would switch out. Every group did all the different activities before they left. And so I did that with my honors class in the school year. They spent a whole day out there. And of course we would, over here on the table somewhere, oh, it's over there, we would have a report, and we would turn that in to the office there at Radnor so they would have some documentation of what we did out there. And of course the data was recorded. I had to remind them that all the time. When you get something, don't forget to write it down. Sometimes we get back, oh, I forgot to write it down. Do you remember what it was? No, not exactly. And that kind of dampened on things.